All right, let's talk about something huge and honestly pretty confusing: employment in India. We hear all the time about its economy just booming, right? But what does that really mean for the everyday person, for the average worker? Let's get into the real story that's hiding behind all those big numbers.
You've seen the headlines, I'm sure. For years, decades even, India's GDP, its gross domestic product, has been on this incredible upward climb. The country's making more, selling more. It's the classic sign of a booming economy. And on paper, yeah, it looks like a massive success story.
And here it is. This is the puzzle at the very heart of what we're talking about today. If the economy is on fire, you'd think there'd be jobs everywhere, right? A huge employment boom. But the reality, well, it's a lot messier than that. And it leads us to one really critical question.
So what's going on here? Well, there's a term for this: jobless growth. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's when a country's bank account, its GDP, gets bigger and bigger, but the number of actual jobs doesn't keep up. The country is getting richer, for sure, but that new wealth isn't creating enough steady paychecks for its millions and millions of people. So, how does that actually look on the ground?
Okay, let's really dig into this paradox. To figure out where the jobs are, or, where they aren't, we first have to look at where people are actually working. And more importantly, how that's changed over the years.
Wow, okay, so this chart shows a huge shift over the last 50 years. Just look at this. Back in the 70s, the primary sector, which is mostly farming, was where almost everybody worked, a massive 74% of the workforce. Fast forward to today, and that's down to 46%. So where do they go? Well, you can see it right here. The secondary sector, think manufacturing and construction, it more than doubled its share. And the services sector, it jumped up even more. Now, this is a pretty classic story for a developing economy, but it's been a really slow move, and farming still has the biggest piece of the pie.
So that tells us where people are working. But the next question is maybe even more important. What's their actual job status? Are we talking about people with a steady salary, or people who own their own business, or something else? The answer, it's probably not what you think.
Okay, this right here really changes the picture. You can just forget the idea of a standard 9-to-5 job being the norm. In India, more than half the workforce, over 55%, is self-employed. We're talking small shopkeepers, farmers working their own land, millions of people just running their own tiny businesses. Only about 1 out of every 5 workers has a regular salaried job. And almost a quarter are casual laborers, meaning they get paid day by day with no guarantee of work tomorrow. And of course, the story is completely different depending on where you are. Out in the countryside, being your own boss is everything. Over 60% of people are self-employed, mostly in agriculture. But head into the cities, and suddenly regular salaried jobs are the biggest slice, though self-employment is still a close second. It just shows you what a massive economic gap there is between rural and urban India. Now, for decades, economists have been pointing to this really worrying trend. They call it the casualization of the workforce, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a shift towards that unstable day-to-day kind of work. It makes workers incredibly vulnerable because they have zero job security and no idea what their income will be next week. So we've got these 3 main buckets of work, right? Self-employed, salaried, and casual. But the mix isn't set in stone. In fact, one of the biggest stories has been the rise and fall of that casual work category. And this timeline shows that whole journey. Look, casual work shot up from the 70s to the 90s, hitting a peak of almost a third of the entire workforce. That was the height of casualization. But here's the twist. By 2018, that number actually dropped back down to where it started. And at the same time, the share of regular, salaried jobs went up a bit. So the situation is always changing. It's definitely not a simple one-way street.
All right, now we get to what is, without a doubt, the single most important idea for understanding work in India. It's this massive divide that cuts across everything we've talked about. And the scale of it is it's mind-boggling.
Seriously, just take a second and let this sink in. You can split all the workers in India into 2 groups, formal and informal. The formal sector, that's your government jobs, your big corporations, employs only about 6% of the workforce. 6. That means an absolutely staggering
94% of Indian workers are in the informal sector. 94%. So, what does it actually mean to be in that 94%? It means you're working without a safety net. Period. No social security, so no pension or retirement fund, little or no protection from labor laws, no real power to form a union and fight for better pay or conditions, and almost every time it means you're earning less than someone in the formal sector doing the exact same job. And this isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It has very real, very human costs. This quote here, it's from a study about what happened when the big textile mills in the city of Ahmedabad shut down. Thousands of workers with permanent, secure, middle-class jobs were suddenly out of work. They were forced into the insecure, informal economy, literally pushing them and their families right back into poverty.
So, when you put it all together, you have this massive economic growth, but a workforce that is overwhelmingly informal, insecure, and unprotected. And that leaves us looking at a pretty uncertain future.
And that huge informal economy also hides some other big problems. The official unemployment numbers, for example, they don't really capture things like disguised unemployment. That's super common in farming, where you might have 5 family members doing a job that really only needs 2. Or seasonal unemployment, where, especially in rural areas, your job might just disappear for months at a time.
And all of this leads to one final, really important question for all of us. Right now, around the world, we're seeing big companies outsource more and more work to smaller outfits, to freelancers, to individuals. The gig economy is changing everything. So you have to wonder, is India's massive informal workforce not some kind of exception, but actually a preview of where the future of work is headed for everyone?